Hello, my name is TatianaGinsberg. I'm the Director of Artistic Projects and Master Collaborator at Dieu Donne Paper Mill in New York. I'm going to talk today about several approaches that we use a lot at Dieu Donne and I use in my own work to making images in paper using different types of paper pulps. At Dieu Donne, we often beat very finely overbeaten pulps so that we can make pulp paints. This is linen pulp that we're using here, and artists can manipulate it in different kinds of ways using different tools. So for example, squeeze bottles or layering washes and using a brush or using a spoon to go into a stencil, pouring through a shaped decal, building up layers in this way, pushing pulp through silk screens to create different kinds of imagery that is similar to how you would screen print. For example, in this image, you can see an old Anderson piece. The screen is being removed. We also do a lot with embedding between layers of pulp. For example, we use a lot of overbeaten abaca that's beaten 8 hours in our Arena beater until it becomes very translucent. Here I'm embedding ribbon and thread in the studio between very, very thin sheets of abaca. We also use watermarks in our work. And we do cast paper projects with artists who have more sculptural approaches to paper, such as Daniel Wiener, who I worked with as a workspace artist. He is a sculptor and pushes, in this case, paper pulp into the molds that he uses, urethane molds, and builds up forms, complex forms in paper pulp. I'm going to show this video, which takes a few minutes, but I'll talk while it's going. And I'm going to talk today a lot about this particular technique that many of you may have seen before, but this is kind of how we do it, which is making a blowout. And behind me is Paul Wong, who was our artistic director for 38 years at Dieu Donne. And he basically invented this technique for working with this particular artist, Mel Edwards, for different kinds of projects that Mel was doing. So I pull a sheet of short cotton and I get rid of the excess pulp around the stencil, which in this case is just a mylar, piece of mylar that's been cut down, or duralar, with the shape of an image. Then I use water pressure to remove all of the pulp around the image. Everywhere that isn't protected by the stencil, the pulp gets blown away or blown out or pushed through the screen in some cases until I kind of only have the pulp where the image is, in the image area. So you can see it takes a few minutes. And then we carefully remove the mylar stencil. We often use eyedroppers with a little bit of water to help assist in removal. And then clean up the image a little bit. Let it drain. So this is a very finely beaten cotton. It would be a little bit too fine to form a sheet by itself. But here I'm going to layer it on top of abaca sheets that Paul has been pulling behind me. And he's drawn registration marks on the pellon, or felt interfacing material. So I know where to put the sheet exactly. And then I just make sure that that short cotton blowout makes contact everywhere that it's going to go. And then we lift it up and we have the imagery now in reverse on the sheet. So Mel Edwards is primarily also a sculptor, and he likes to see the ways that the different fibers will shrink against each other. So we have developed a slow drying technique where the cotton, in this case, black, short cotton, or finely beaten second cut cotton linter, it shrinks against the abaca, which is long beaten, 8 hours. Mel also comes into the studio and uses found objects and other materials to create blowouts, as well as using the mylar stencils that you just saw. So you can use actual objects as well. And we use this technique with a lot of different artists who work in very different ways. So for example, this is Swoon, also known as Caledonia Curry. And she made a very large scale project with us a little while ago, which uses mylar stencils, and it takes several people to sort of take those stencils on and off the mold. But again, this is just a finely beaten cotton, and we use water pressure in the same way that you just saw to blow out or remove the pulp everywhere that isn't part of the image. And then these are layered on top of base sheets of abaca that also already have some pulp painting and stenciling on them. She made 4 40 by 60 inch pieces to go together behind this large work, which is 7 feet tall. This was recently shown, or just before the pandemic, shown at an art fair in New York. I use this technique in my own work as well. And in this case, instead of making the blowout separately on the mold, I actually build up layers of paper and then carve back down into them, blowing out with stencils, so that instead of creating a sharp image that's by itself, I'm kind of excavating or drawing through the layers of pulp. So in this piece, I've layered abaca, linen, kozo, and cotton fibers, and they blow out at different rates. So you can see the textures at the edges of the shapes. So to make something like this, I would form a sheet of abaca or something as the base, maybe put some pulp paint washes on it, then layer over it with other colored plain or pulp painted sheets, and several layers get built up together before I do the next step, which is the blowout. So I lay down a stencil and I use a water pressure to remove or carve into all of the layers of the sheet wherever the stencil isn't protecting it. So you can see it can go down and create a sort of pretty sharp image, and you can leave a little bit extra of the edges, sort of aesthetically. You decide how much of that you want to leave. I've been using this technique in this punch series. These pieces are all just about 30 by 35 inches. Another artist who uses this blowout technique in both the additive and subtractive ways is Lina Puerta. And Lina builds up images on top of some really unusual materials like sequined fabrics and ribbon, all sorts of things that she finds. And then she layers on top of that blowouts made in those 2 ways that I've just showed you. So you can see that some of them are revealing back down to that base layer where she has the sequined fabrics. This is kind of an intense project, and it uses the water pressure. Sometimes she uses actual fruit or other kinds of materials, found things, to create shapes and textures. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about today is just to take you through some stenciling. We work a lot with stencils and collage. And this is a recent project that I've been working on developing with this artist, Will Villalongo, who was in the studio just a couple weeks ago. And in this image, you can see him stenciling on the left, and then that's our intern, Sarah Mack, cutting things out on the right for collage. So to do this, we form a sheet of paper and then make a wash in silver pulp paint. Then we place a Mylar stencil on top. Then we blow out a circle shape to create the shape of the paper as a whole. Then we start to stencil. So we stencil the background layer for the hands and the eyes. Then we stencil the details. Then we add a floral pattern, a sort of scroll floral pattern overall. And in this case, we're using spoons to go through the stencils, but sometimes we use squeeze bottles or larger spoons, ladles, etc. Once we complete all of the stenciling, then we get ready to place all the collage materials that Sarah or other people have cut out already. And so you can see on the left, the collage materials are sort of ready to go. And we've started to place them onto the image. And then right on the left, upper left, there's a little template to show where each of the butterflies will go. So those get placed individually by hand with a little bit of methyl cellulose on the back of them. These are inkjet prints on machine-made Japanese paper. And then the final image combines all of these things in a way that we like to think is very seamless and feels very organic, like they all sort of grew together or came together naturally. So that's something that we've just been working on recently, and a few of the other techniques that we use a lot in our studio. And thank you for listening.